everyone. My name is Ree Brennin Houston. I work as a species at risk biologist for Fisheries and Oceans. I'm grateful to be working with a number of partners like Chief Hugh Akagi and his team to help species at risk recover. Today, I wanted to share a few stories with you, like why I care so deeply about the earth. A few key experiences in my childhood fueled my passion for conservation. I'd like to share a few stories with you about the implementation work that we do and would not be able to accomplish without partners like you. I'd like to end with what gives me hope when there are so many reasons today to get discouraged. When I was 6 years old, my family traveled to Pakistan to live for a year. My father was a doctor who was invited to help set up a family planning program for the country. That's me in the pink shalwar and kameez, and my sister Catherine is in blue. I remember the day my family went on a field trip with my dad's colleagues and their families. That's me in the upper right. I was most impressed by that flock of geese. We went to visit the ruins of the ancient city of Harappa, one of the oldest cities in the world, having thrived over 4,000 years ago. Harappa and its sister city of Mohenjo-daro were part of the Indus Valley civilization. I was very emotionally moved to walk among the clay brick foundations of the houses and city buildings. My parents bought replicas of serving spoons used by this Bronze Age civilization, and ones I still use today on my dinner table. This experience and many others from my year in Pakistan remain vivid in my memory. The three lessons I took away from these childhood impressions are this. 1, great civilizations don't last forever. 2, people and their animals can greatly impact a landscape. 3, an impoverished landscape leads to impoverished opportunities for people. When I was 10 years old, we moved to New York City. I remember taking a boat trip around Manhattan on the Circle Line. When we got to the World Trade Towers that were being built, I took a photograph with my Brownie Starlight camera. I wondered if someday it would be significant. I remember frequently going for walks with my sister along the riverfront near our apartment building. We'd look down into the water and see raw sewage spewing out and get totally grossed out by the floaters we'd see going by. I also remember barges piled high with all our garbage headed out to sea. I was told it was being dumped in the ocean. When I was 12 years old, my parents bought a farm in upstate New York, 100 miles north of New York City. My mom wanted to get my sister and me out of the city and on a farm to learn about nature and food security, how to work with nature to grow your own food. Our farm went right down to the Hudson River, but the railroad tracks ran right along the river from New York to Albany. When we took the train up from the city, I remember my sister and I giggling and being horrified to flush the toilet in the train's bathroom and see it dump right onto the train tracks, moving quickly below us. We'd hold the handle down just to watch the railroad ties moving quickly by. Needless to say, we didn't dare swim in the Hudson River or spend very much time crossing the tracks to get to the river. When I was 14, I got involved in a group. It was started by the folk singer, Pete Seeger. He inspired people to build a replica sloop like the one that's used to sail the Hudson River back in the 17 and 1800s, carrying food from the farms down to the city and goods from the cities back to the rural communities. They named the sloop the Clearwater, and they sailed it up and down the Hudson River, holding music festivals to draw people down to the riverfront and learn about its plight and work together to restore it. I helped form our local chapter of the Hudson River sloop Clearwater. The sturgeon became the river's symbol of restoration. Atlantic and shortnose sturgeon had been overfished for their roe and meat. There was so much meat available in the 1800s and early 1900s that it was nicknamed the Albany steak. That's sturgeon meat. Volunteers joined a subgroup which was called Pipe Watch, and they would keep tabs on the industrial effluent. If it exceeded their legal limits, the companies were taken to court. I remember learning that PCBs dumped into the river accumulated on the bottom and severely impacted the sturgeon, who are bottom feeders. Fast forward to today, decades later, I am still passionate about the river habitat, restoration, and species at risk recovery work. As a DFO SARA recovery biologist, I'm responsible for 3 species of freshwater mussels, the Lake Utopia rainbow smelt, both large and small body populations, and the shortnose sturgeon. I'll share with you some of the highlights of our work with these species. When I started my work, one of the first things I did was to reach out to the people and organizations who were in the best position to help me with implementing the recovery documents. We call this implementation work, or recovery work, or simply stewardship. I asked them what they needed to help do this kind of work. Training and species identification was one of the things they mentioned. I heard a funny story from William Polchees from the Woodstock First Nation. He had taken a mussel identification workshop taught by Mary Solos from the New Brunswick Museum. He thought it was wonderful and wanted to do outreach about mussels, about freshwater mussels, with his community and his salmon survey team. But he said to me, you know that big, beautiful, glossy book, The Freshwater Mussels of Maine, that you provided to us? Well, it would get soaked and fall apart if we tried to use it standing in the middle of the river in our hip waders. Blinding flash of the obvious. So I started working with Donald McAlpine and Mary Solos at the New Brunswick Museum to produce waterproof, pocket-size field guides for freshwater mussels of maritime Canada and one for freshwater fishes of conservation significance. Donald McAlpine has done an amazing job producing these field guides. They're now in 4 languages: Wolastoqey, Peskotomuhkati, which are pictured here, Mi'kmaq, French, and English. Later, we contracted Sam Andrews of the Canadian Rivers Institute to develop a waterproof, pocket-sized card to help fishermen distinguish between Atlantic sturgeon and shortnose sturgeon. When these animals are small, they can be difficult to tell apart. Distinguishing which species is caught as bycatch is very important to understanding how much of an impact it is having on these species. The rainbow smelt that live in Lake Utopia appear to be in the middle of what might be a speciation process, whereby evolutionary forces seem to be selecting for a small-bodied form that specializes in filter-feeding plankton and a larger-bodied form better adapted to eating small fish and invertebrates. It is very rare to see this speciation process taking place in the same location. The Darwin's finches of the Galapagos Island in Ecuador are another well-known example. Usually populations are isolated geographically and then they diverge. This is a unique species pair and they are impacted by anthropogenic threats, so they are listed under SARA as endangered. One of the most important stewardship activities we can do is to make sure they are able to get up to their spawning streams in the springtime. Sometimes winter storms wash down wood debris and leaves from the forest and can block access to the streams. We are very grateful to the New Brunswick Aboriginal Peoples Council, who in 2014 and 2015 did a lot of good work in this regard and produced 2 excellent reports we still refer to today. Then the Eastern Charlotte Waterways took on this work for a few years, but they are busy doing a critical habitat study at Trout Lake Stream for these smelt. We are extremely grateful that the Peskotomuhkati have now assumed the role of monitoring the spawning streams each spring. That's Alexia Meyer, the fisheries technician of the Peskotomuhkati Recognition Group. I love this photo. I love the way they captured both the small-bodied rainbow smelt in their spawning stream below the water and the forest above, with Alexia as the human component, stewards of the whole interconnected system. Indigenous peoples from all over the world have been stewards of their lands and waters for thousands of years. In addition to making sure the spawning streams are clear, they also have a SARA research permit to collect fish that have died naturally, what we call morts. These are measured and preserved for aging and genetic analysis, as there is some indication that the 2 smelt populations are hybridizing at an increasing rate. It is not clear yet if this is due to anthropogenic stressors. The short-nosed sturgeon is listed under SARA as special concern. The only known population of shortnose sturgeon in Canada is in the St. John River. It is the most northerly population of the species and is genetically different from other populations in the United States. It is found in 25 rivers from New Brunswick down to Florida. When I took on responsibility for this species, I began asking the question, well, if it's found in 25 rivers up and down the eastern coast, why isn't it in the Skutik? I got all kinds of answers. Of course, it's obvious now, the dams block the ability for the sturgeon to get upstream. So I asked the question, well, were shortnose sturgeon in the river before the dams were built? That's when I learned that they were built a long time ago. Some people said they wouldn't have been able to get past the salmon falls. But sturgeon biologists, many of them, said, of course they would have been there. In the management plan, there are 2 conservation measures. Well, there's a lot of measures, but there's 2 in particular I was focusing on. One says, confirm the presence or absence of shortnose sturgeon in areas beyond the known extent of occurrence. The other measure that I focused on was gather and share Indigenous knowledge on shortnose sturgeon habitat, use, and extent of occurrence. So we decided to contract Chief Hugh Akagi and his team to do a study. We asked them to gather all available information, knowledge, and stories on both the historical and Indigenous knowledge on the presence or absence of sturgeon in the Skutik and the importance of sturgeon to the Peskotomuhkati people. Chief Hugh Akagi and Harry Sappier enlisted the help of Donald Soktoma, tribal historian, who pulled together and illustrated an extensive collection of local stories, experiences, and knowledge. They also enlisted the help of Alex Hoare and others to pull together information from wide-ranging fields such as biology, archaeology, anthropology, and local knowledge. The report is 47 pages long, and more material may be added in the future. One of our colleagues in DFO Science was so impressed, she said it should be considered for publication in the manuscript series. And last but not least, that brings us to the freshwater mussels. DFO has partnered with the New Brunswick Museum, Cape Breton University, and over 12 First Nations and Indigenous organizations to host and participate in freshwater mussel identification and survey techniques workshops. It's a mouthful. We have held a number of these over the years, and many First Nations river guardians have taken this training. The photo on the lower left is from 2018 when the Mi'kmaq Conservation Group hosted a workshop. That's Keith Christmas of the Unamaki Institute with the white bucket and Alana Silaboy from MCG with the orange one. The 2 photos on the right are of young women from St. Mary's First Nation who took the workshop in 2017 that was hosted by the Woodstock First Nation. So what's so cool about freshwater mussels that everyone wants to learn about them? These little guys are the filtration systems that help keep our lakes, rivers, and streams healthy and clean. Up in Cape Breton, Pottle Lake is the drinking water supply for the city of North Sydney. There are over 5 million yellow lamp mussels living in that lake. This species alone filters 60 million liters of water a day. That's equivalent to 10 Olympic-sized swimming pools. If you try to do that mechanically, it would cost you a fortune. I know this because I used to work at the Seattle Aquarium and I saw how much those filters cost. But these little mussels are dependent on specific species of fish for reproduction, called their host fish. Reestablishing fish passage, preventing the introduction of invasive species, and keeping our waters clear of silt will go a long way towards helping our freshwater mussels to keep our waterways clean and healthy. So what gives me hope globally? Well, 50 years later, I have lived long enough to see the Hudson River becoming cleaner thanks to the efforts of environmental groups like the Hudson River Sloop Clearwater, government agencies, and local citizens working together. The cleaner river and the protection of species has resulted in the short-nosed sturgeon population of the Hudson River to have largely recovered, and the Atlantic sturgeon is on its way. Over the past 55 years in the province of Pondicherry in India, the once barren land, deforested and turned to desert by human impact, has been slowly and steadily replanted, and the tropical dry forest has been regenerated. Native species of wildlife have returned. The once impoverished landscape is now lush greenery, providing an ecosystem that protects the river and coastal areas from erosion and siltation and supports resilient, flourishing human communities. I am inspired by the documentary called Ever Slow Green that tells this remarkable story. I have hope that humans the world over are beginning to recognize the interconnectedness of Earth's living systems and the need for us to work together to restore and care for them, for their sake and our own. What gives me hope locally? People caring about rivers, the riparian habitat, seeing the connections, and caring. Fishermen caring enough to learn to identify which species of sturgeon they have in their hand and record their catch and bycatch, and caring enough to hurry to throw back the bycatch to minimize harm. What gives me hope? People from many backgrounds coming together to promote stewardship of the lowly freshwater mussels and the rivers they help keep clean. On the left is a group from the Mussel Workshop hosted by the Mi'kmaq Conservation Group, in which a number of other groups and Indigenous organizations participated. And the Peskotomuhkati fisheries technicians who, despite the COVID lockdown in March 2020, found a way to monitor the lure spawning streams to make sure they were not blocked and the fish could get upstream. You are my heroes. Thank you very much. Bye.